From their earliest history, the city-states of Greece were continually at war with one another, each struggling to gain an advantage over its neighbors. Yet, in spite of these hostilities, there was among the Greeks a strong sense of national identity. The philosopher Gorgias was the first to publicly denounce internecine fighting between Greeks and called for them to unite, turning their spears against Persia, the common foe. He delivered 2 speeches to this effect. The first was at the Olympic Games of 392 BC, where citizens of the various Greek states came together and, according to custom, all hostilities were suspended for the duration of the games. A second speech he delivered in Athens at the occasion of a public funeral at the time of the Corinthian War. 8 years later, at the Olympic Games of 384 BC, the orator Lysias spoke in the same vein. He also urged the Greeks to unite against the Persians and against all tyrants. According to Lysias, it reflected poorly on the Greek nation that parts of Greece should be ruled by barbarians and others by tyrants, and that all the more since it was not that the Greeks were too weak to resist, but that they wasted themselves fighting one another. Following the example of Gorgias and Lysias, many other Greek orators proclaimed the need for the unification of all Greeks and a fight against barbarians. But one man devoted himself wholly to this idea. Isocrates, an Athenian by birth, made the propagation of Panhellenic policy his life's mission. Over a period of several decades, he wrote to prominent Greek leaders, urging them to adopt a Panhellenic policy. Among these were Agesilaus, the king of Sparta, and his successor, Archidamus, Dionysius, the tyrant of Syracuse, Alexander, the son of Jason, tyrant of Pherai, and also, it is thought, Jason of Pherai himself. But as Isocrates' efforts were met with no result, he was constantly shifting his support from one potential Panhellenic leader to another. It was in this fashion that in 346 BC, Isocrates turned to Philip, son of Amyntas, the king of Macedonia. As he had done with others before, Isocrates urged Philip to take the initiative, to bring the disparate Greek states into unity and concord. Philip himself was to take the first step by reconciling with his enemies. But the use of force was ruled out. He was neither to seize the Greek states nor impose himself as king over them. Then he was to secure the cooperation of the Greeks in the Panhellenic expedition against the Persian Empire, of which he would be the supreme leader. Isocrates was optimistic that the campaign would be successful. He calls the great king a ruler of disaffected subjects, and states that the barbarians were in no position to stand up to the Greeks. And especially, the leader of the expedition would be Philip, a man who had already achieved much that seemed beyond hope of reason, and who possessed an army unmatched anywhere in Europe. The letter from Isocrates reached Philip shortly after the conclusion of the Third Sacred War, which had dragged on for an exhausting 10 years before Philip had put an end to it. In recognition of his crucial role in resolving the conflict, Philip was awarded 2 seats on the Amphictyonic Council, through which he secured a voice for himself in the affairs of Greece. The relative peace in the Greek world was further secured by a common peace between the Athenians and their allies on the one side and Philip and his allies on the other. The treaty, which became known as the Peace of Philocrates, brought to a close a long-running conflict that had begun in the 2nd year of Philip's reign. However, the Peace of Philocrates proved short-lived. It wasn't long before relations once again soured. The Athenians declared war on Philip in the autumn of 340 BC. Soon after that came the outbreak of yet another sacred war. In 339 BC, the Amphictyonic Council declared war on Amphissa and turned to Philip for help. In the autumn of the same year, Philip marched into Greece as commander of the Amphictyonic forces against Amphissa. But bypassing Amphissa, he seized Elatea, a city which controlled the way into Boeotia and Attica. Fear now spread that the Macedonian king planned to invade Attica, and in response to the threat, Demosthenes formed a coalition of Greek poleis to resist Philip. The conflict reached its climax at the field of Chaeronea in 338 BC, where the Macedonians routed the Greek alliance. It was a decisive victory for Philip. As the story goes, Isocrates, upon receiving news of the disaster at Chaeronea, exclaimed, "Greece will lose her liberty," and he abstained from taking food. He starved himself to death at the age of 98. Justin, in the epitome of Pompeius Trogus, writes, Philip managed his conquest in a way that none might think of him as a conqueror. He desired that he should not be called king, but general of Greece. Philip knew that he could not rule Greece as a king. The Greeks held monarchy in contempt and took pride in their freedom. But Philip also knew that any voluntary settlement would not last, as had been proven by the breakdown of the peace of Philocrates. Therefore, he was now envisioning a different kind of common peace, one that would be anchored on his military power, yet kept and maintained by the Greeks themselves, the Hellenic League. Following his victory at Chaeronea, Philip established separate treaties and balanced the power of individual states. These settlements essentially molded the individual units of Greece with which Philip was preparing to deal collectively through the Hellenic League. Philip was adept at employing traditional methods of control through the use of accepted Hellenic institutions, such as the Thessalian League and the Amphictyonic Council. According to Moralia, when Philip was advised to place a garrison in every Greek city, he replied by saying, "No, I would rather be called merciful a great while than Lord a little while." Nonetheless, in the initial stages of the new order, he deemed it necessary to establish garrisons in Ambracia, Thebes, Corinth, and Chalcis. In the winter of 338 BC, Philip invited the independent Greek states to Corinth. The choice of Corinth was highly symbolic, for it had been there that the Greek states came together to form the common alliance to resist Xerxes' invasion. Philip intended to undertake a similar feat, but this time, rather than to resist Persia, to invade it. However, these plans were not to be discussed at the first conference. For the moment, all that was on the table were the terms of a common peace. Deputations from virtually all the Greek cities came to Corinth. Only the Spartans stayed away. They would not humiliate themselves to the point of sending envoys after Philip's campaign in Laconia earlier that year. Philip greeted the Greek embassies and treated them hospitably. Diodorus Siculus writes, "He showed a kindly face to all in private and in public, and he represented to the cities that he wished to discuss with them matters of common advantage." Justin, in the epitome of Pompeius Trogus, writes, "Philip's joy for this victory was artfully concealed. He did not smile at the table or mingle any diversions with the entertainment. He had no chaplets or perfumes, and conducted himself with such prudence, between his own secret joy on the one hand and the grief of the enemy on the other, that he neither appeared to his own subjects to rejoice, nor to the vanquished to insult them. Philip announced his terms for the common peace, which would put an end to the continual state of conflict that had plagued the Greek world for centuries, while also undermining any attempt to disrupt Philip's new order. Unlike its predecessors, this peace was to be maintained by a council, the Synedrion. This council would meet regularly to oversee military, financial, domestic, and foreign affairs between member states. The number of representatives for each member on the council was to be determined according to its population and its naval and military strength. The council was to be presided over by a hegemon, or leader that managed all aspects of League business. The hegemon was to be, of course, Philip himself. The main provisions of the League can be reconstructed from a partially surviving inscription and extant speeches of Demosthenes. Professor M.B. Sacalario established a list of 13 postulates. Clause 1. Not to compel any other state to join the common peace against its will. Clause 2. To abide by the treaties. Clause 3. To respect one another's liberty, autonomy, and territorial integrity. Clause 4. Not to make war against each other unless a clause of the agreement has been violated. Clause 5. Not to interfere with the shipments of other signatories. The first 5 clauses are standard for these kinds of common peace pacts. The following ones are, however, an innovation. Clause 6. To abide by the resolutions of the Synedrion. The institution of the council had not been implemented in any previous common peace, but only in alliances and in the Delphic Amphictyonic League. Clause 7. To carry out the orders of the hegemon. Clause 8. Not to give asylum to political exiles, nor to assist them against the governments of their homelands. Clause 9. To respect all constitutions in existence at the time of the signing of the pact, with the exception of the tyrannies. At the time of signing, most of the Greek states had oligarchic regimes and governments friendly to Philip. Clause 10. Not to redistribute landed property, nor to cancel debts or free slaves. Clause 10 was designed to frustrate any attempts to enlist the support of landless peasants, debtors, or slaves to oppose Philip by promises of land distribution, cancellation of debt, or freedom. At the same time, it served the interests of the wealthy, who would now be inclined to support Philip. Clause 11. Not to pass laws inflicting punishment by death or exile or confiscation of property for offenses which until then had carried a lighter penalty. Clause 12. Not to commit hostile acts against Philip or his heirs. Clause 12 essentially made it illegal for a member state to oppose Philip. Clause 13. To cooperate in suppressing any violation of the pact and punishing offenders. Clause 13 obliged all the signatory states to punish any member state that might violate the common peace. It brilliantly exploited the major flaw of the Greek polis, the hostile attitudes towards one another. If one state were to upset the peace in any manner, or worse still, break its oath of allegiance, Philip knew that the other states would be all too ready and willing to unite in punishing it. In that way, the Greeks would maintain the peace themselves, without the need of Philip's intervention. The League was essentially designed as a constitutional mechanism by which Philip would maintain control of Greece, with all the legal cover needed to deal with those who wished to break free from his hegemony. The Greeks had some semblance of autonomy in their affairs, but in reality, as hegemon of the council, Philip had complete control. In fact, Philip as Hegemon had more influence over Greece than he did as king over Macedonia itself. Macedonian kingship was not an absolute monarchy. Within the borders of Macedonia, Philip was restricted by tradition, usage, and precedent, the laws. However, these restrictions did not apply beyond the borders of Macedonia, where Philip could exert as much power as he wished. Philip's common peace seemed stronger than any of its predecessors. Yet the surest guarantee of the duration of the peace lay in the institution of the hegemon, and in the fact that Philip held this position. If need be, Philip was able to deploy the might of his army to ensure the existence of the League. After the announcement of the new common peace, Philip sent the emissaries home and required them to bring their city's responses to him at Corinth the following spring. When the envoys returned to Athens, Demades introduced a motion that would have the city participate with the Greeks in the common peace and in the Congress. Phocion advised the Athenians to wait until they knew exactly what Philip was planning and what demands of the Greeks he would make. But he was ignored, and Demades' motion carried, a positive indication that people knew it was not the time to refuse Philip. In the spring of 337 BC, representatives of all the independent Greek states assembled again at Corinth. Only the Spartans refused Philip on the grounds that what was imposed by a conqueror was not peace, but servitude. However, Sparta's defiance meant little. Philip's incursion into the Peloponnese had left the Spartans isolated, and even though they continued to decry Philip, the other Greeks knew that they had little choice but to accept his terms. Philip received the oaths of allegiance from the Greek envoys and was elected, as he had anticipated, hegemon of the council, even though Macedonia was not a formal member of the League. The fragmentary surviving inscription preserves signatures of the Thessalians, Ambraciots, Phocians, Locrians, Malians, and that is where the inscription breaks off. Through the League, Philip essentially became the ruler of Greece, and it was only then that an invasion of the Persian Empire became a realistic possibility. Now Philip put before the Greeks the plan of an invasion, ostensibly to liberate the Greek cities in Asia Minor from Persian rule, and to avenge the sacrilege committed by Xerxes against the temples of the Greek gods. His Panhellenic reasons were, however, a ruse, advanced solely to appeal to Greeks, and indeed many of the Greeks would be pleased to punish the Persians for their past actions. Philip's real reason may have been the pressing need to acquire money because of his declining revenues. But many Greeks, too, would have their eyes set on the Persian riches that might be gained from a successful campaign. But there was also another aspect that many Greeks would find appealing. The invasion seemed the best way to get Philip out of Greece, and some might have even hoped that this expedition would result in the demise of the man who had turned the Greek world upside down. Raising great expectations, Philip won the Greeks over to war, and the plan of invasion was ratified. Philip took for himself the title of Strategos Autokrator, commander-in-chief with full powers over the united Greek forces. It was a military title which emphasized his absolute rule. The number of troops to be furnished by each state was then determined, and a resolution was passed declaring a traitor any citizen of a member state who had entered the service of the Persian king. Now, as Philip's plans became known to the Greeks, the Athenians regretted participating in the League, as they understood that they were now required to furnish Philip with triremes and horsemen. Phocion addressed the Athenian assembly. "This is what I feared when I opposed your course of action. But since you have agreed upon it, let us make the best of it, and not be discouraged. Our ancestors also were sometimes in command and sometimes under command, but by doing well in both these positions, saved both their own city and the whole of Greece. About the same time, the trial of Lysicles was held in Athens. Lysicles had been the commander of the Greeks at Chaeronea, and now found himself, on the accusations of the orator Lycurgus, sentenced to death. You were General Lysicles. 1,000 citizens have perished, and 2,000 were taken captive. A trophy stands over your city's defeat, and all of Greece is enslaved. All of this happened under your leadership and command. And yet you dare to live and to look on the sun and even to intrude into the market, a living monument of our country's shame and disgrace. Philip deprived the Greeks of their autonomy, but he also put an end to the internal wars that had plagued the Greeks throughout their history. The success of Philip's projected Panhellenic invasion of Persia would conceivably achieve all that Isocrates had expressed in his famous letter to Philip. Many of Philip's actions were in accordance with what Isocrates urged him to do. In his Panhellenic program, Philip consistently aimed at two goals. He strove to allay the enmity of the Athenians from 346 BC onwards, and after the Battle of Chaeronea he treated his enemies very leniently. And he unified the Greeks before the expedition to the east. The correlation of Isocrates' letter with Philip's subsequent actions would suggest that Philip was indeed influenced by Isocrates. However, it is also possible that Philip could himself have had the same ideas, without necessarily being influenced. The Hellenic League, known more commonly today as the League of Corinth, saw Philip simultaneously pacify the warring Greek states and place them under his rule. Through the League of Corinth, Philip had secured Greek support for his invasion of the Persian Empire, and now was free to embark on his Asiatic policy. In the following spring, an advance force was to cross over to Asia Minor in order to secure a beachhead for the upcoming campaign.